Welcome to my show. This has to be the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. If you're coming from moving on again, I usually have my big hunky fella. He tends to temper a room for me, and he's not here. I thank you for coming here with me. I want to stop and start over. But I've been sitting in this chair for an hour. So I have to ask you for a favor if you've known me for a long time or you're just meeting me. If you would stick with me while I work this out, because this is something that I've wanted for a long time. When Jay and I'll go all the way back in a little bit, but when Jay and I were married, we were both in our second marriage, and quickly there was something missing, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I just told him, there's something we're supposed to be doing. You know, like we walked through the fire and we came out. I came out alive, and with all, you know, you're like checking for bullet holes, and I came out alive, and essentially, instead of what I thought was the next step, which was just utter ruin, you know, not to be dramatic, but I just kind of was raised that you mess up bad enough and you just head directly on down to hell. And I know that's awful to say, but I have to be open with you guys about who I am and what I believed growing up, and the way that those beliefs charted my course incorrectly, and what I feel that the Lord has for us instead. And that wrapped right back up into what I was telling him. Like, I know we were down in the pit. I was in the bottom of the pit, just holding my knees and rocking in the mud. And I was like, if I ever get out of here, I'm going for rope and I'm coming to get the rest of you. And so he said, what does that look like? And I said, I don't know. I don't know if it's a book. I don't know if it's a vlog. I don't know if it's a blog. And so I thought on it for a long time, and I realized I want to do a podcast. I want to do a podcast. I feel like when I am feeling lonely, or I am in despair, or I'm needing someone's comforting, calming words in my ear, that I can just put on my headphones and find my favorite show. And I want to put my hat in the ring. I want to add to that. I want to join the help crew. And we talked about it for a few weeks. I found a producer. A man had just come down to help us with, or not help us. He'd asked Jay to star in our kitty is scratching and it's distracting me. Tommy, Mommy's doing something so brave. And he had come down, and Jay had done a commercial for one of our seed companies, and I fell in love with the process. He wanted to re-record the sound of the screen door. He wanted to drive down the gravel road and add that sound. We all sat for like 45 seconds waiting for my dog to howl out the window because he was sad. I had left him outside. And the producer was wanting to hear that sound and have it recorded for the show. I really fell in love with that process, that production, the attention to detail, making those creative things and feel important when a lot of people would just dismiss them. They were already important to me, and I hadn't really known anyone that would find value or worth in them. And something lit up in my heart, like, oh, we can make those things additives. And that really spoke to me, that the sound of a screen door could add to the soothing, therapeutic comfort of a show. And I kind of learned my love language in that day. And so I told him, I think I want to start a podcast. So it was going to be just me. I didn't know how it was going to go. I knew that I couldn't ask my husband to be with me because in the very beginning of our marriage, I thought him to be rough around the edges. And he is rough around the edges, but not in the way that I initially thought. He's actually just somebody that is brave and takes this world by the horns and does what he needs to do the right thing. And I misconstrued that in the beginning as somebody that I couldn't censor. And back then, we were all wanting to be famous and Instagram famous and silly, TikTok. And, we were all wanting to be like, in my arena, mommy vloggers and things like that. And I just thought, it's so silly to admit, I just thought, we're going to start our show, we're going to immediately get famous, and Jay's going to say something and we're going to get canceled. And so I never really asked him to be a part of it with me. Now, in his perspective, and I can believe that two totally different perspectives can be true at the same time. It's just happened too many times in our marriage for me not, or in relationships, for me not to recognize that two people can describe a situation opposite and then both be right. It's just, they say you don't hear things the way they are, you hear things the way you are. If you ask Jay what happened in those days, he will say that I continually nagged him until he agreed to join our show. And so he comes to me, he's like, fine, I'll do it. And I'm like, I didn't ask you to do it with me. And he's like, I'll do it. And I think that the importance of us having those two different experiences in the making of the podcast is one of the greatest things that's ever happened in the history of our marriage and family, because that podcast has single-handedly saved us. Like Jay Norman and I would not be together without the Moving On Again podcast. We sat down to that first episode and he said, welcome folks. And I looked at him and I said, motherfucker, this is my baby. You're not the host. And y'all, he was the host, and he is the host. We still have that show. He's so good at it. He did not get us canceled. He brilliantly walked us through that process. And I'm thankful. It took me stubbornly having to walk through a few of those parts to realize where we were supposed to be. And I can see that that's what I'm doing with this one, this new show, my baby. You're going to meet a lot of my friends on this show, a lot of my dear friends that know me really, really well. There are a couple that have said, I want to do everything I can to help you with this show, but I will not be on a mic. And those people are going to be just as important as the guests. One of them is the very reason, the sole reason for this moment that you and I are having right now. And I came to her, I've known her since I was 14 and I'm 44, so 30 full years. She walked into my freshman honors English class and the rest is history. I came to her a few months ago and just described the struggles that I was walking through. And after talking to me for several paragraphs of words that I needed to, that she graciously let me pour out, she said, it sounds like you're having a creative block and that creativity is flowing in for you to share it with others, and it's just getting stuck. You're not doing anything to get, it's coming in and you're not being obedient to get it out. And I said, well, what does that look like? I don't have anyone that I want to do a show with besides Jay. And at the time, Jay does the work of 8 men. It's very hard to get a couple of hours from him sitting here on the mics with a clear head. And even though that is so wonderful for our marriage, I knew when to cry uncle, and I knew when to say the nagging of, we haven't recorded yet. When are we going to record? I need this to be important to you as it is to me. I knew that that was Bob Goff says Thursdays are for quitting. And I knew that was something we had to quit. Not the podcast, the nagging. I had to just take that off the table. And so I was telling her, I don't have someone that I want to do a show with besides Norman. And she said, you don't need anyone besides Norman. And I'm like, well, then what am I going to do? And she said, it's you. You're doing the show. And I was like, with who else? And she said, with you. And it was a comical little back and forth where she was trying to explain to me this, and I was not getting it. When I did get it, I started crying and laughing at the same time. There was a little bit of shame in there, like shame on you. Shame on you that you didn't know that you were the person you were looking for the whole time. How could you not know that the person you've been looking for is you? And also, question, why wasn't it even one of your options that you would explore? And so for the past few months, kept looking outward. I've got to find my guests. Where are my guests that are going to be on this show that I can bring these beautifully deep, enriched conversations to your headphones and your homes that are going to allow you to have connection anytime you want in those days of loneliness or despair or needing someone to sit right by you. I want this show to be able to do that. And so who can I have on this show that would help us to bring these wonderful conversations to you? And my husband said, let's take just a second. You've already spoken with your girlfriend and figured out that the answer is you. Why have you left the answer to go look for all of these other people? And I'm like, yeah, that's nice and everything, but what do I do? Just talk to myself? There's no way I'm going to be able to drone and talk to myself. And fun fact, I turned Theo Vaughn on one of his solo episodes. I was like, all right, Theo, teach me. And I had to turn it back off because it made me so uncomfortable thinking of me in that position. All of that to say is, again, the first line I brought to you guys. This is the scariest thing that I've ever done in my life. And I'm thrilled to be able to do it with you. I am a namer. When I was pregnant with I have 3 children. When I was pregnant with them, I wanted to know what their name was immediately. I needed to know what they were, a boy or a girl. And I'm the first one in my family. I'm the youngest. None of the babies in our family have we ever known their gender until they were born, except my children. I guess I was the wild card from the very beginning. But I needed to know what they were, and I needed to know their name. I love a name. It's important to me. When Jay and I started our podcast, I would go on these I used to run and jog, and I would go over all these ideas of what I wanted to name the podcast. And when this new project was being birthed, I was like, all I need for it to have is a name. So I was in the gym. I had taken a break between sets and just threw on TikTok. I'm heavily addicted to TikTok. And it was a video, it was a TikTok of a small college football team. And in his celebration dance for his touchdown, he'd stood on his head. And the NFL had gotten wind of this TikTok, and the NFL players were doing that in their celebration. They were standing on their heads. And the guy said, and mind you, this is after going over thousands of options for this podcast. And the guy said, he just kept saying, if not for the internet, how would anyone know about this small college? How would anyone know that this boy did this in the celebration? People would just have to kind of tell you about it. It wouldn't have had the effect that it's had if not for the internet. And I immediately knew. I was like, that's it. I was on a leg extension, and I said, that's it. It's the name of my podcast is If Not for This Podcast. And in my head, it was so many things could be filled in. I would have been so alone today if not for this podcast. I wouldn't have laughed today if not for this podcast. I wouldn't have spoken to anyone today, if not, and yes, you can speak to me on your phone. Just talk right at me. I'll hear you, I promise. If not for this podcast, I would never even know that someone else dealt with this mental struggle exactly the way that I do. These conversations that we're going to have are going to be so enlightening. And I fully believe that evil and dark and Satan has us absolutely alienated and isolated on the things that we share across the board. So where you're thinking that you're the only person that's struggling with this, you're not just not the only person. Chances are the majority of us know exactly what you're talking about. And I'm here to kind of throw the lid off of those things. And so if not for this podcast, I would have never known anyone else knew the way that I felt. If not for this podcast, I'd have no idea that someone could love the Lord with everything in their bones and use the F word. If not for this podcast, I would have never known that there were a group of women that could connect on this level. And so that was its name. And it can go and go and go. And I think that's what this neat little journey is going to be, is just finding out more reasons that this show can play a part in the healing and the comfort and the therapy and the enrichment in all of our lives as we join in community with each other. At least that's my hope. So I go straight to Hamish. He's my chat GPT. And I said, Hamish, can you help me to, sometimes what's in my head and the words that are coming out are not so greatly connected. So Hamish helps a lot with descriptives and putting things into words. And so I said, can you help me tell someone what my podcast is going to be about? So a few people, of course, were asking, and I could feel myself fumbling over those words. I still fumble over moving on again, explaining it, and we've had this show for nearly 7.5 years. And so I asked Hamish, can you help me to explain my podcast? He said, sure. And he came up with the most beautiful description. I'll post it on one of our posts that's coming up, and so you can have it to read and stuff. And he said, if not for this podcast is my space to talk about the moments and choices that really shape our lives, the big ones, the small ones, and the ones we didn't see coming. It's a mix of honest conversations, stories, and reflections about the what-ifs we all have. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's real, but it's always about exploring how we end up where we are and maybe where we're heading next. And for a moment, I needed to re-edit that with him. Like, it's not, if not for this, the podcast, it's if not for this podcast. And I sat there and I stopped myself and I said, he didn't mess up. He didn't mess up. He didn't mess up. It's both. It's a double meaning, and I would have not probably even realized it until I worked with that chat GPT to find out about my own podcast. And so I thought that was a really neat thing that I named it. We kind of like assume we have a good grasp on the situation, and that few little moments helped me to know that I still do have some things to learn. And so I've tried to move slow. My sister says, move slowly as if in a fog on purpose. And I've adapted that in my life because I tend to get ahead of myself and I tend to overreact and be a little spontaneous. And so, like I told you a minute ago, I'm in my mid-40s and I want to be able to show my children how to move slowly and intently and with a purpose, where you're not left feeling like you need to keep apologizing for the past 24 hours. I've been renovating a home for the past 1.5 years. I thought that I would like to flip homes. Turns out one's good. One is enough. It's a beautiful home. My favorite part of renovating it is praying over it. Hello. Well, it may seem that I don't quite know how to properly end my show, and that may be the case. But however, I had mentioned several times that that was one of the scariest things that I've ever done. And out, thank the Lord, came a constant state of flow for 23, 24 minutes, which may not seem long. However, seconds after I took my very first pause of the whole show, my camera turned off from overheating, which we've gotten since fixed. Stuff like that is too kismet to me to ignore. So we're going to take that note and end that first episode right there. Thank you guys for being here with me. Thank you for sitting right by me. And until next time.